Hello and welcome to Module 1 of the SPH Teaching Kitchen's online cooking series. My name is Emily Schlag. I'm a chef as well as a registered dietitian, and in today's lesson I'm going to show you how to make a vinaigrette. The great thing about vinaigrettes is you really don't need a recipe in order to make one. Once you know what types of ingredients you need and what ratio to use them in, you can really get creative with your ingredients, with your flavors, and make a really delicious vinaigrette. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you what types of ingredients we need to make a vinaigrette, the amounts that we need to use them in, and I'm also going to show you 3 different variations on a simple vinaigrette just to give you some ideas on how we can get creative with those flavors. So let's go ahead and get started. In order to make a vinaigrette, we need 5 basic ingredients, starting with oil. Most recipes are going to call for extra virgin olive oil because it has really great flavor and is a really healthy oil for you. If you don't have extra virgin olive oil, you could also use other oils such as canola oil or regular oil, vegetable oil, whatever you have on hand. In addition to our oil, our other main ingredient is going to be vinegar. So vinegar is one place where we can get really creative with our flavors. There's so many types of vinegars out there and you can use whichever one is your favorite. Some examples could be apple cider vinegar, balsamic vinegar, rice vinegar, or red wine vinegar. There's really a lot of options out there. You could also use citrus juices such as lemon, lime, or orange juice. When it comes to how much of these ingredients we need to use, this is where a basic ratio comes into play. So when we're talking about vinaigrettes, our basic ratio is 1 part vinegar to 3 parts oil. And what that means is however much vinegar I'm going to use, I multiply that amount by 3 to know how much oil I want to use. So if I have 1 tablespoon of vinegar, I'm going to have 3 tablespoons of oil. So as long as you can remember that 1 to 3 ratio, 1 part vinegar to 3 parts oil, you know how to make a vinaigrette. In addition to our oil and our vinegar, we have 3 other ingredients that can be really important in our vinaigrette. So we have mustard, honey, and salt. The mustard is important because oil and vinegar do not want to mix together. If you pour them both into a jar, you'll see that they separate pretty drastically. What that mustard does is it acts as an emulsifier to keep the oil and vinegar together, which means that you can whisk it together, stir it together, and that mustard is going to combine the oil and the vinegar so they're not going to separate as quickly. You really don't need a lot of it, so if you don't like mustard, I promise you're not going to taste it in there. You can leave it out, but just know that your vinaigrette is going to separate a lot more quickly without it. Then we need our sweetener. I like to use liquid sweeteners such as honey or maple syrup or agave nectar because I don't have to dissolve them too much in the vinaigrette. You can use things such as granulated sugar or brown sugar as well, but know that it's going to take some extra stirring to get that sugar to dissolve. Again, we don't need a lot of this. We're not adding a lot of sugar to our dressing, but that little bit of sweetness helps to balance out the acidity of the vinegar. And then finally, we just need some regular old salt. Salt's important because it helps to bring out extra flavors in our vinaigrette and therefore our salad. If you leave the salt out, your salad's just not going to be as flavorful when you add that vinaigrette. You can leave the salt out if that's a concern for you, but I recommend just using a lot less salt than a recipe calls for if you're concerned with how much you're eating. Most recipes are not going to call for a lot of salt, maybe an eighth of a teaspoon or a 1/4 of a teaspoon. You really don't need a lot of it to get some really great flavors. And so now I'm going to show you 3 different variations on a vinaigrette. I'm going to show you an apple cider vinaigrette, a balsamic vinaigrette, and then a citrus lime vinaigrette, just to give you some ideas on how we can get creative with those flavors. For the apple cider vinaigrette, we need 3/4 of a cup of oil, a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of honey, 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard, a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt, and black pepper to taste. I'm going to make this in a mason jar because it's easier to shake everything together. So first you will pour your oil into the jar. My oil is a blend of sunflower oil and extra virgin olive oil. I like that it has the olive oil flavor, but is much more cost effective than pure olive oil. Next, you will add your apple cider vinegar. Then you will add your honey. One trick to this is actually dipping the tablespoon into the oil mixture. It makes it so the honey falls off of the tablespoon much more easily. Then you will add your Dijon mustard. If you need, use an additional spoon to scrape everything out of your tablespoon measure. Next, you can add your black pepper. Use as much as you would like. If you want, you could also add some other herbs and seasonings at this point. I'm just going to add 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now all you have to do is put a lid on your mason jar and shake it up until everything is combined. If you don't have a jar with a lid, you could also whisk everything together in a bowl. Make sure the honey is fully incorporated. Sometimes it sticks to the bottom of the jar, so you just have to shake it up a little bit more. And that's it. You have made an apple cider vinaigrette. The balsamic vinaigrette is very similar to our apple cider vinaigrette. The only difference is the type of vinegar we use. So add 3/4 cup of oil to your mason jar. Then add 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar. Here it's easy to see how the oil and the vinegar separate. This is why it's so important to add the mustard. Add 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard. Here you can see I dipped the tablespoon into the oil. This makes it much easier for the honey to come out of the tablespoon measure. Then add 1/4 teaspoon of salt and any additional seasonings. Here I'm just using black pepper. Put the lid on your mason jar and shake it up. Here you can see that now the oil and vinegar are no longer separating, and that is because of the mustard that we added. And now you've made a balsamic vinaigrette. The cilantro lime vinaigrette is a little more complicated. We need 1/2 cup of oil, 3 limes, 1 orange, 1/2 a shallot, and 1/2 a bunch of cilantro. We also need salt and pepper. You can start by pouring your oil into a bowl. For our citrus, if you would like, you can zest the outside of the citrus. This rind has a lot of really great flavor in it. To zest, you will use a microplane. It's like a grater, but much smaller, so we're only going to get the zest off of the lime and the orange. You can see that once you get the colored part off, there's a white portion underneath. This is called the pith. It's pretty bitter, so you don't want that in your dressing. We're not going to zest all of the limes because that can get bitter if we use too much zest, so I'm only going to zest one of the limes. I'm also going to zest some of the orange just for a little additional flavor. Now we need to juice our citrus. Start by cutting everything in half. There's a few different tools we can use to juice. We can use this citrus juicer. It works pretty well. You could also use this tool, it's called a reamer, or my personal favorite is just to use a fork. I'll show you how to use all 3. For the juicer, you're just going to put 1/2 of the citrus in the juicer, cut side down, squeeze all of the juice out, and then I like to fold that piece in half just to get as much juice out of it as possible. These work fine, but I find that they don't get as much juice out as I would get if I used a different tool. For the citrus reamer, all you have to do is insert it into the middle of the citrus that you're trying to juice and twist to release all of the juice. To use a fork, it's like using a reamer. You just stick the fork into the middle of the citrus and squeeze. With the fork, you jimmy it up and down as you're squeezing to release all of the juices. You're going to want to rotate the fork as you go. This is my personal favorite. I find it's easiest to use, and it means that you don't need to have any special tools on hand to juice your citrus. Once you are done, you should have about 1/2 cup of juice. It's okay if you have a little more or a little less than that. You'll notice that we're not adding any sweetener here. The orange juice that we added will make our vinaigrette plenty sweet. Next, we're going to add our shallot. A shallot is just like a small onion, so you're going to dice it the same way that you would an onion. You do want to finely dice this, you don't want it to be too big. And we're just going to use half the shallot here. If you don't have shallots, you could use just a few tablespoons of diced red onion or yellow onion. You could also add a few cloves of garlic instead. Now we're going to add our cilantro. I'm going to use about half a bunch here. After it's chopped, that'll be about 1/4 cup. I like to use the stems of the cilantro. You can pick off the leaves if you would like, but the stems are tender and have a lot of flavor to them. I just trim off about the bottom inch or so because they are a bit thicker. To cut the cilantro, you want to roll it up into a bundle and then slice it as thin as you can. We want this to be pretty small. If you would like, you can go back over that cilantro and chop it as small as you would like. Before adding the cilantro, it's helpful to whisk together all of the ingredients. Then you can add your cilantro and mix everything to combine. Finally, don't forget to add your salt and pepper. We're going to add a ½ teaspoon of salt here. Add your black pepper to taste, stir to combine again, and you are done. Store your dressing in a jar or container with a tight-fitting lid. Because this has shallots in it and fresh herbs, this will last about 1 week in the refrigerator. If you would like, you could also blend this vinaigrette. This is my personal favorite way to make vinaigrettes that have fresh items in them, such as herbs, shallots, or garlic. All you have to do is take your dressing and put it into a blender. If you are doing this, you could skip the step of chopping up the cilantro and just put it straight into the blender. Then all you have to do is blend on high speed until the dressing is as smooth as you would like it to be. I like my dressings to be pretty smooth, so I'm going to blend this for about 1 full minute. As you can see, this dressing now looks a lot creamier. That's because blending incorporates air bubbles into the dressing that gives it that lighter color. I'm going to blend it just a little bit more. When you are done blending, you should have a bright green salad dressing, and you will see small green flecks of the cilantro. Again, this is going to look creamy because of all of the microscopic air bubbles that the blender incorporated into the dressing. Store this dressing in a jar with a tight-fitting lid. Again, this will last about 7 days or 1 week in your refrigerator. Thank you for joining Module 1 in this video on how to make vinaigrettes, and we will see you again for Module 2.